And thanks everybody for joining us today. Today's topic is delivering ROI by taking focused actions from a process gap analysis. Joining me will be my friend and colleague, Jim Bolton. But before we get to Jim, I'd just like to share with you a quick story. This topic actually was suggested by one of our audience members who responded to our request for different topics that they would find relevant. So I wanted to thank that audience member for suggesting this topic. A couple of things that I think are relevant here in terms of this focused topic. One is I would say every now and then we get managers and supervisors and bosses and customers who want to know the progress of some initiative. And when they ask us how's it going, we have to then determine how we equate the progress to something measurable. I think one of the problems or pitfalls people fall in today is that we start our progress against a focused gap analysis continuous improvement initiative, but we fail to really take the time to measure what we're doing currently, plan for what we want to do differently in the future, and then put a mechanism in place to make sure we track that so when somebody says, how are we doing, how are we progressing, we have empirical data and reports to show them. There was only one person that I think could join us and offer the expertise, experience, and knowledge to help us out with this topic, and that would be my friend and colleague, Jim Bolton. Jim, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Pete. That's a high bar to hurdle, but I'll give it a shot.
Jim is president of Propoint Solutions, and Jim is my go-to ITSM guy. Whenever I have a problem or issue or a client that I don't know where to send them, I send them to Jim, and him and his great team take care of them. So thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Pete. Hey, I was, as you were doing that introduction, I was thinking about a few years ago we were doing a consulting engagement for county government, and they were asking us to take a look at their IT organization. So we've come in, spent a week or so looking at their processes, came back with a report and said, here's all the things that we need to be that you need to be working on to get the improvements that you're looking for. And I'll never forget the chairman of the board of directors for the county government stood up and looked at me and said, I don't really care about this IT stuff. We need to know how to fix potholes faster. And I think that's really part of what we need to be talking about here is how do we understand what the business is looking for. We have a tendency to get so focused in the IT stuff, just like you mentioned, that we miss the big picture of what does the business need us to be doing. They needed potholes fixed in a hurry.
It's a great point, and if I may, similar story. We had won the HCI Team Excellence Award, and my CIO called me in and said, Pete, the senior management team is nervous. And I'm like, nervous why? He goes, well, we don't necessarily need a maturity level 5 service desk. What we need to be good at is making tacos.
That's exactly right.
And so it does put it in perspective. So thanks for sharing that, Jim. Everybody, today Jim and I are going to, or mostly Jim, I'm just going to be your facilitator and ask the tough questions of Jim and put him in the hot seat and let him share his knowledge and experience. But we tried to frame our 45 minutes together. Jim is going to talk about the roadmap, what is needed in terms of framing this continuous improvement gap analysis, making sure you have the right things identified at the beginning. Namely, in a CIP, we need to make sure that we have our critical success factors and our key performance indicators. Also, what is the steps for a process assessment to get it to a point where we feel comfortable that we have identified what's measurable, what's important to the business that Jim shared with us. We're going to talk about some of the business case steps that could be involved in here as well, especially when trying to present a business case for continuous improvement that it might involve capital funding or money. And then lastly, how to make progress against that targeted actual improvement steps. Jim shared this first step with me, so I'm going to let Jim kick it off. Jim, what does this quote here mean to you?
The reality is, and it's interesting, Pete, we came across this quote a couple of years back when one of our customers asked us to do a presentation to the leadership team on strategy. And you initially begin to frame this and think about exactly what we need to be talking about, and I head off right away looking at the service strategy book and doing a deeper read, and the exercise became probably always when you do these a bit cranial, and we need to bring it back down to something that's a lot more practical. And the reality is, every time we show this slide, the leadership team looks at this and goes, "You're right. We have so many. We have organizations. We don't call it project management. We call it project manglement, because there are so many things going on, Pete, that they can't decide, and these things get reprioritized in some cases almost every month or maybe even every couple of weeks, and then the support teams get frustrated because they're not sure what they're supposed to be working on, and we begin to teach the business that all you have to do is call the right person, and we'll make that one our priority and get started working on that one right away, and the whole thing becomes very frustrating for all of us. So it really goes back to, I think, the key word would be governance, kind of setting the compass. What is north? What are we trying to accomplish? And getting us to a point where we can say, yeah, we could do this, but we're not going to. Not can we do it? That's really the question that we should be asking. Not can we do it, but should we be doing this? So choosing the right stuff to work on, getting very focused, because there are so many different choices, as this graphic shows.
Well, and it kind of reminds me of the Big Rock story as well, Jim, that sometimes we let too many day-to-day distractions and all the little stuff consume our whole day, and then when we go to make time for the real business value stuff, we just don't have the time to do it.
It's a good point, Pete. We talk about, a lot of times in our team, we talk about the tyranny of the urgent, and the urgent things take over our time that we really need to be spending on the stuff that's important. And so as managers and leaders, this really becomes it's our responsibility to be able to say, this is where we're going, this is what we've decided, these other areas are areas of interest, and so we won't lose them. We'll capture those, but we need to have a mechanism to be able to weigh those against the objectives that the business has set, so that we know we're working on the right things.
So, Jim, if we can, before we get started, we do hear a lot of stories from our associates and peers and community and customers about where people are struggling with this whole idea of focusing on the right things, making sure that we run the right things through the process, so that we can get something of a measurable return or something to show or track progress that shows business value. What are some of the pitfalls today that you're finding your customers and the community are running into that's really preventing them from kind of showing success in this realm?
It's a good question, and I suppose I have two views on that. One would be from a business view, and I'll do that one fairly quickly. At the business level, what we discover as we're working with the organizations to improve their process maturity and improve their service management, fairly frequently, Pete, what we discover is the business hasn't set their own vision and objectives. This becomes challenging, obviously, from the very get-go. So let's assume for everybody in our audience that the business has set their objectives. They know where the business knows where it needs to be going. The business knows what's important. So then the second half of that question then gets us into what do we need to be doing from an IT perspective? How do we focus our energies from an IT perspective? So there really are two sets of governance. There's a business governance that sets the focus for the business, and then there's an IT governance that sets the focus for IT. So I really think it's two parts, Pete.
So what I'd like to do now, Jim, is just go to this slide right here where you and I kind of talked yesterday about these three areas of always knowing where you are, where you need to be going based upon how you plan to get there. So can you just kind of frame this for us as maybe the beginning of how you would get started, or how you would walk a customer through this kind of high-level, maze of direction? I guess giving your customers direction, this would be a great place to start. Agreed?
Yeah, absolutely. The thought here is that if we don't know where we are, it's a bit hard for us to figure out what we should be working on, given the dozens of things that we could be putting our time into. How do we set the focus so that we're working on the one thing that is absolutely the most important, or the two things, or three things, depending on how many resources you've got? I remember a few years back working with a customer that had established IT governance And one of the things that they did was a quarterly project planning where they would take a look at all the opportunities that they could be working on. And they were bold enough and strong enough in their governance that if there was one new opportunity that came up and it was going to consume absolutely every bit of the organization's resources, they were strong enough to be able to say, that's the one thing that we're going to be working on. So good for them. But back to where we're at, we need to be able to compare the work that we're doing to other organizations that are similar in the industry. You know, I was over at talking to a potential new client over the last fall, and we were talking about desktop support and how they were doing, and this particular person was convinced that they were doing a great job with desktop support. And I said, really, how do you compare your prices to other folks that are doing desktop support? And they looked at me and said, well, there's really no competition in this area. When I hear a comment like that, I'm thinking, you know what, I don't think you know where you are. I don't believe that you've really assessed where you're at today. So we use and I know sometimes I come up with really bad visuals, but people remember them. And the bad visual that I have for the where are we now is I call it the ugly baby check. You know, when you have a brand new baby, or in our case, grandchildren, but when you have a brand new baby and you look at those pictures, sometimes you look at that little kid and go, only the parents could love that kid. and to be honest with you, the same thing is true for a lot of our IT organizations and the work that we're doing. We feel so close to it. We're so excited about it and so proud about it. And maybe we've done something new that's improved a particular area. And I think we need to be able to step back, and I'm not sure that that's something that we're really able to do very well. I think in human nature there's a pride factor that makes this difficult. We need to be able to step back, and sometimes we even need to be able to get somebody from outside the organization to come take a look at how are we really doing here? How do we compare? Who else is doing desktop support? You know, what are the numbers? And frankly, sometimes looking at these numbers can be a bit humbling. So, you know, Gartner and Forrester, there are a lot of organizations that can help us really kind of be a bit more reflective and look at it from outside the family in. And then from a process perspective, we'll get to that in a minute, looking at a process maturity assessment.
Well, I like the discussion so far. So basically, if we're at a service desk level, you know, we're looking at certain benchmarks and metrics. If we're at a desktop level, we're looking at certain benchmarks and metrics. And, you know, even if we're at a service delivery model, it's important to understand what the cost of delivery of that service is over a period of time that encompasses not just the devices or hardware, software, operating system, but also the maintenance, the support, the service, the patching, the infrastructure costs. All of that really goes into this whole cost of ownership. So if you're approaching it from a balanced scorecard perspective, and one of your scorecards is cost, but another one is service level adherence, another one might be customer satisfaction, and then another one might be around quality or efficiency or workload optimization. These kind of balanced metrics really tell a better story than just focusing on one myopic one. Agreed?
Pete, that's absolutely right. You know, I think we studied balanced scorecard years ago, and it's definitely something that we need to be spending a lot more time coming back to. We know for sure that on that balanced scorecard, when you squeeze that balloon on one side to make an improvement in one particular area, the other areas have a tendency to expand out and are doing even more poorly. So finding that balance. You know, I was, as you were mentioning that, I was thinking of a few years back, when I was working in the industry rather than on the industry. When I was working in the industry, we had a new CIO that came in, and I had put together a report that showed that our service desk was going to be making some specific improvements over the next year in a particular metric. And I remember a brand new CIO, and he's asking me to bring in these performance metrics for the organization the first time I've met him. And I remember introducing my metrics saying, gee, if I were you and I saw these metrics, I would fire me. And I remember him looking up from his desk and going, tell me a little bit more about this. And this really goes back to the where we are and how do we compare with other organizations and rolling in the balanced scorecard. What I would tell you is we all want to get good really fast, but the reality of making that happen, unfortunately, rarely is that possible. So when I put together my improvement plan, and it was a new organization that I was working with, my improvement plan spanned over a full year, and even at the end of the year, I remember showing a line across the top and the target that we were going to be moving toward, but that line across the top says, and even at the end of the year, if we do everything that we've committed to, we're still not going to be fully where we need to be. And I think that that awareness and acknowledgement across all of those balanced scorecard elements, frankly, Pete, would make all of us better managers.
And I agree, Jim. I wanted to just kind of go back to this slide right here. This one really, I think, kind of shows your perspective and where people might start managing their projects from, and I guess, you know, depending on where they choose their adventure will lead them to different paths, to different.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think it's probably more a reflection of my sense of humor. As we read through these together, and I'll just read through these together, this is kind of the beginning of conversations with organizations, often senior leadership. I'm sure many of folks that are on the webinar with us or will be coming in later will appreciate this. There are a lot of organizations, frankly, that are managing by crisis. Whatever the big thing is, that's what we're going to be working on, and think about what the outcomes are when we manage that way. Then managing on based on customer demand. We have a tendency, again, to make sure that we haven't validated the demand and understand what exactly are we going to be able to get for that directly to the point of this session today. What's the value? We never really quantify it. The customer just wants it. The business just wants it. And then by extrapolation, if we continue doing it the same way over and over again, hopefully things will get better. We know that doesn't work. Hopeful, managing by hope, and frankly, for a lot of organizations, it's just been managing by best effort. The reality is none of these are good choices. And so one of the things that I would ask our audience to do is kind of think through this list, and if you find yourselves in one or two of these categories, or maybe even in all of these categories at some point during the day or some point during the week or month, then you really need to go back and say, you know what, I think we need to take a strategic approach here.
So, Jim, I wanted to thank you for putting together some graphics for us. I'd like you to kind of take the audience through this one right here in terms of how an organization, through assessment, continuous performance improvement focus, and then also an understanding of that key where we are, where we're going, and how we're going to get there, to get to certain levels of maturity that are achievable but also valued by the business. If you wouldn't mind kind of giving us a quick understanding of what you have here for us.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Pete. I remember getting a phone call in the office a few years back from an individual we had not worked with before, a CIO of a company, who said, I think I need this ITIL stuff. And my response, regardless of how the topic is introduced, is typically along the lines of, well, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What's the challenge that you're facing? And this particular individual, I remember very clearly, he said, Jim, my job is balancing chainsaws every day. And you know, Pete, I thought about that, and I thought, man, you know what? If the CIO sees their experience as balancing chainsaws, can you imagine what it must feel like for the folks that are in the IT trenches? They're clearly in the very bottom here, firefighting and reactive. And the reality is there's always some amount of firefighting and there's always some amount of reactive activity that any organization is going to be doing. But we need to be minimizing that. We need to be advancing this ball. We need to be advancing our organization, our processes up this value chain in order to achieve those areas of focus that get to the biggest value. So for a lot of organizations, and because we look at ITIL for some of the guidance when we're doing IT service management consulting work, And you look at the ITIL guidance, and Pete, there are 26 processes to choose from, and unfortunately, a lot of organizations, or some organizations, struggle with trying to figure out, well, which ones are we going to be picking from, and maybe we need to be doing them all. In fact, I had a conversation not long ago where one of our customers said, well, gee, maybe we shouldn't be working on this process, and the immediate response was, well, we shouldn't be working on the process if we don't see what the business value is that's going to be coming out. So the intent of this slide, Pete, is again, to kind of help folks think through, what stage are you in? If you're in firefighting and reactive mode, then you're going to be focusing on incident management. Maybe you're doing a lot of firefighting because you're breaking things in IT. So maybe some change management. Probably if it's reactive and firefighting because customers or the business is frustrating, probably need to be working on some service level management. And the reality is, for practically any organization, you can fix 3 or 4 processes probably at once, and that's about as many as you can do. So the thing that I love about best practice and continual service improvement is, Pete, this concept that let's just get a little better. Let's just get a little better. And so we show this as a ramp in this slide, but rather than stair steps. Let's just get a little better. Let's just get a little better. Let's get a little better. And the reality is, even as we're putting all this energy into improving our work, getting to higher levels of business value, there needs to be something that underpins that effort to make sure that we don't start sliding backwards. I don't know about you, but I mean, raising teenagers, teenagers' bedrooms never naturally get cleaner. The same thing is true from an IT organization. Your processes and your products don't naturally get better. They naturally degrade. It's the law of entropy. So how do we measure that? So again, based on best practice, how do we improve that? And Pete, this gets to an important point. Maybe now is a good time to talk about it. The importance of a baseline. Because we have a tendency, well, in fact, let me ask you, is now a good time to talk about baseline?
Yeah, you know, I think it is. I have here on this slide here one of the disciplines of all this continuous improvement process and how to identify key performance indicators that are mapped to critical success factors. But to your point, Jim, it really is kind of the train leaving the station, and if we don't understand where we were before the project left, it's hard to measure where we were at that time and then track our progress against it. Personally, I think the baseline is really important because at any time my manager comes to me and asks me what the progress is, to me the progress is the actual, where I am now, compared to the baseline, which is where I was before I left. And the opportunity for more improvement is the current actual versus the target that I set for myself. So those two things are understanding, I think, helps us communicate and focus in what this whole continuous improvement process is all about.
Pete, that's it. You are right on target. The whole concept of baseline, for those that aren't, that this may be a new concept, is if we don't describe what it was like when we started, and we then initiate some project and begin to start working on it, and we start putting some level of effort into it, we need to be able to compare where we were at versus where we're at today. So for a lot of organizations, they've chosen not to do this. So they'll get excited about doing some process improvement. They'll get excited about working on some continual service improvement, and trying to think about measuring ROI. But without a baseline, it's not obvious that things have been improved. You know, if you looked at my office, which I'm not going to show you right now, but if you looked at my office, I have whiteboards all around the office, and those whiteboards talk about, here are the things that we ought to be working on. And Pete, every time we accomplish one of those things, I write a date on it, and I write who did it, because at the end of the year, or in our case on a quarterly basis, we go back and look at these whiteboards and say, man, look at all the stuff we've done. We've been able to accomplish. And without those whiteboards, Pete, I think we just kind of keep pushing forward and keep pushing forward and keep pushing forward, and we can't measure our success. And then we get frustrated, and then the business gets frustrated because they're investing money. We're investing money, and we're investing time, and we're investing resources, and we have a tendency to not remember how bad it was. or to not appreciate the improvements that we've made. So in both cases, yeah, being able to set a baseline, be able to prove the progress that we've already made, and then again to be able to take a look at that gap from the base, from where we're at now versus where we could be, and then we have to decide is this where we should be, and then move on from there.
Yeah, somebody shared with me the Stephen Covey Envision the End. And as leaders, and I think leadership is a big part of all this, correct, Jim? I mean, if the CIO is feeling pressure to be under firefighting mode, then the rest of the management team is under duress and stress and pressure. And at some point, the leadership within our organization has to take control and work to stabilize the environment before we move to any type of continuous, proactive business value piece. If we can't deliver services that are stable, that are available, that are reliable, all of that, we're not going to be able to move up the value chain, correct?
Pete, that's absolutely right, and very sadly, I think that many organizations have good managers, but may not have those leaders or leaders with those leadership skills that you're describing. I'm thinking of John Cotter's leading change and creating that vision of what is that we're trying to accomplish. In fact, Pete, that might be a good slide for us to pull up where we start talking about kind of the vision and where do we need to be beginning our work here. If we don't know what the vision is for the organization, how do we know that we're heading in the right direction? So for a lot of the organizations that we've worked with, that visioning exercise becomes, in some cases, it feels a bit overwhelming. I'm thinking in one case of a customer that we were working with recently, where the challenge was, boy, there's just a lot of, if we went back to that ramp slide, we don't need to, but there's a lot of reactive sorts of things going on. There's a lot of firefighting things going on, and so our tendency is to be focused on those, as we talked about a bit earlier. But this organization had some terrific leadership, and this leadership said, yeah, you know what, we do need to put a portion of our energy onto firefighting and reactive, and we need to fix some of those things. But, man, we need to think about what it is that we do here. This goes back to that vision statement. What do we need to be really good at? What do we do, and what don't we do? All the way back to that essence of strategy, choosing what we don't do. And so we did a brainstorming session, Pete, and listed all the challenge areas for the organization. And you can imagine, with the leadership team there, we came up with, it doesn't matter, but we came up with probably 35 to 50 different things that were identified by the leadership team as the challenge areas for the organization. And we took that list then and said, you know what, we can only choose 4 of them to work on right now. And what's interesting is I like to do a silent ballot or whatever. I don't want folks to be influencing each other's decisions. And so they looked at those 35 things, and they came back with the 4 things that were most important to be working on. And then for the next several months, that was the focus. They tested every CSI opportunity against those 4 core areas of focus, and if that CSI opportunity didn't match a multiple number of those opportunities, of those core focus areas for the organization, it was put in what we call a CSI Register. This is something that we might want to be working on, but we're not going to focus on it now. And Pete, I got to tell you, there aren't a lot of organizations that leadership that can hold that level of discipline, but these folks did. And they made amazing progress very, very quickly just by establishing a vision and saying, these are the 4 things that we're going to work on now. The rest of the stuff is interesting, but we're going to focus on those 4.
I think you're right, Jim. I think it takes leadership and discipline. I think the book you mentioned was awesome, the Cutter book, Leading Change. Also, Good to Great talks about getting the right people on the team, because the right people can help lead some of these initiatives. And even myself sometimes in a leadership position, you have meetings during the day, people bring up different things, and it's easy to kind of push all of this stuff onto your team. And I think one of the disciplines leaders have to have is really filtering what they push down to their team based upon what's important and the knowledge of what they're working on, so we don't distract them with other stuff that we get during the day that are not really aligned with what we need to do that are really the big rocks.
Pete, good point. I think of a lot of times I have opportunities to meet with senior leaderships for organizations that we're providing consulting services for, and I can think of several times where and even in our own businesses, Pete, where you're looking at several different possible paths and realizing, man, this is a complex scenario here. We begin to build some fairly complex organizational or assessment model, and the reality is, I like to think of it like a chessboard. There are a lot of different pieces that we could be moving, and we simply, as a leader, we just need to make a decision and move a piece. So, as we're looking at this six-step process, the big challenge for a lot of organizations then is simply taking a look at that vision statement, assessing where we're at today, which is what we just described, and then saying, all right, what are the things that we're going to be fixing now at that stage 3? What is it that's most important out of all those choices? What are the 2 or 3 or 4 things that we're going to be working on? And obviously, the important part about that step 3, Pete, and you've already mentioned it, is how are we going to measure and prove that we've accomplished the objective? What is this process going to deliver for me or the business in terms of getting to the business vision? What is it going to deliver for me? How will I measure that?
And it's not something easy, right, Jim? I mean, in a recent engagement, we were asked to work with the management team to set goals, not only for the management team, but also for their teams. And when the disciplined, experienced person in goal setting looked at them all, there were goals, but they weren't measurable. And so that really made it hard at the end of the year for someone to be reviewed on anything because their goals didn't have measurements associated with it.
Yeah, good point. I got a call last year from one of our clients saying, Jim, you've been talking about key performance indicators for the last couple of years now, and we've finally convinced management that we really need to be working on key performance indicators, and you told us that it would be even ideal if we could put it into people's performance reviews. So there would be an incentive program, at least in this organization. There would be some compensation at the end of the year based on their personal performance reviews. And I'm like, I'm getting excited, and then the last part of it was like, oh no, and the last part of it was, Jim, we need to get these key performance indicators into their performance reviews by the end of the week. Can you help me? Pete, why don't you walk us through, or I can walk us through, kind of that whole thought from getting from a vision statement to a critical success factors and key performance indicators.
Yeah, it's also important too that as you align your business your team's objectives with the business objectives, and then you map that down to some measurable targets. And as you push that down to your team, if your team is operational, you want to make sure that what you're measuring, like a performance scorecard that's balanced with your team, whether it's some sort of workload optimization, customer satisfaction, quality scores, knowledge sharing, whatever it is on the operational side, SLA adherence, first fix rate, first contact resolution, whatever those metrics are that you're holding your team accountable for, make sure that that performance scorecard is the bulk of their KPI. The bulk of their performance review should be on what they do on a daily basis. Right, Jim?
That's exactly right. And, Pete, even as you're describing that, I remember thinking about one of the things that Cotter talks about in leading change and being a better leader is we need to be able to create a vision that everyone can see. And so when we go back to this first step on the six-step process, that vision needs to be something that all of us see. So when we get down to the key performance indicators that are in those individual performers' report cards or scorecards, they know, here, the reason I'm doing this is because it gets us to the big vision. The reason I'm doing this is because it gets us to the big vision. And that's how we get an organization to all of us be pulling on the same rope.
Yeah. Yeah, and if I can, Jim, I just wanted to give a quick example here on this one and then let you take it from there. But in a current company I'm working with, what is the vision? The vision was to have a stable, secure, and available service environment for delivery of application services and other types of services that were important to the business. Namely, the business couldn't be productive if these services weren't being delivered in a very timely, responsive, available way. What they found out now in their baseline assessment was that there was way too many P1 and P2 issues that were impacting the availability of these services, and they started to track them. And they found that the number of P1, P2 incidents over a certain period of time was way beyond what they felt comfortable with. So what they did was they created a vision for a more stable, secure, available service environment. They went and looked at measurable targets in terms of the change management process and how changes would be disciplined and rigored into the production environment, how they would go and do testing to prevent some of these things from happening, what the number of P1 and P2s were that they targeted for a period of time, the ripple effect of number of incidents and people affected, the number of, or the time of the outage and time to recovery, and then how many times this happened again. So were they doing problem management, root cause to eliminate this from happening? And that's what the focus was. And then once they started to, educate people, train people, and give them the opportunity to do these things better, these processes better, better coordination, better rigor, better discipline, they started to measure the improvement of putting services into production that were not having the issues that it were, or the ripple effect that we're having before. And all of this turned out to be a continuous improvement, measurable progress around the decrease of P1s and P2s and the availability of production systems in the environment. So I just wanted to walk our audience through how that could be done in the reality of an operations service thing. And any comments there or suggestions or experiences?
Yeah, Pete, so what I'm thinking is you're describing that, and I'm sure that you did it, or the organization did this, is what is the cost of those downtimes at different times of the day? What is the cost of the downtime for each of those applications? When you're describing large or uncomfortable volumes of P1s and P2s, the first thing that always comes to my mind is, well, were they really P1s and P2s? Because a P1 says a significant business impact and it needs to be fixed very quickly. And if they truly were P1s and P2s, then yeah, obviously we're not delivering we're not providing a stable infrastructure. So the way we get to fixing this, and the way, which is kind of looking at step 4 then, the way we get to fixing this, the way we get resources put on standing up these processes and standing up the policies and getting the training done and getting the tools brought up. The way we make that happen is to be able to tie it back, just like kind of like we've talked about in the title of this presentation, tying it back to ROI, understanding that we're working on the right stuff first. So when organizations say, well, we can't afford to put the resources into getting this fixed or to getting to a high level of stability, then the first question I think, Pete, that we need to ask the organization is, well, what do you think the cost of instability might be? We need to get some help calculating that. If the business vision is we'll provide a mediocre set of services, then frankly, IT isn't that hard of a job. But if the business vision is we're going to provide a stable infrastructure, then there's a lot of core processes that need to be in place, many of the ones that you've just mentioned. So when organizations tell me that they're struggling with getting to a level of stability, I go back and ask the question, well, how stable is stable enough? And what is the cost of instability? And now let's go get some resources to start standing up these processes that will bring us to consistency and stability based on the savings that we're predicting we're going to be able to accomplish. So, Pete, I think you and I are in a complete agreement on that one.
Well, I think your point is good. It really comes down to, where the business needs are, the business requirements. In certain businesses, having 5 nines of availability is just not an option because the company might be an e-business company or transacting some of their businesses through a 7x24 functional website, and they can't afford to have 6 hours of downtime during a month's time because it's going to impact their revenue model.
Yep, those customers might never come back. Interestingly, that kind of takes me back to my first story, by the way, thinking about we just need to fix potholes faster. And I know I don't from a time frame perspective, but I wanted to make sure that I get this in. What I should have said, because I kind of walked away from that meeting thinking, wow, we're never going to be doing much process consulting work here. What I should have responded to, and obviously I've learned, hopefully we're all learning over the years, what I should have said was, we'll develop an app for that, Pete. We're going to develop a pothole app, and as you're driving down the street and you see a pothole, you push a button that says pothole here. It aggregates the GPS coordinates from the folks that are pushing the button saying potholes are here, orders the raw material, schedules the truck to go out based on the frequency of reports that are being in place, and suddenly we've got it. Suddenly IT has accomplished something that met a business vision, or in this case, a county government's vision. They didn't care about fixing incidents fast. They didn't care about technology outages, or I shouldn't say didn't care, but this overwhelming issue with the voters being frustrated with all the potholes swamped all the other activities, and I think that's kind of a good summary context for all of us. ROI has to be ROI based on business vision, and if fixing potholes fast is what they needed, then all the other processes that I was proposing could use some attention. Frankly, didn't much matter to them, Pete.
Yep, yep. And I heard a great statement the other day that I think makes all of us, or should make all of us, think about the ROI modeling and what we're doing to save the company money. This gentleman said that his boss said, yes, that's fine when you do ROI and you're saving me money, you're investing money, but I'd rather have you take the money you save, invest it in something that I can make $1 billion with. So we have all this investment in technology and applications, now mobile devices, mobile apps. What can we do to leverage that investment to come up with a new service, competitive advantage, or help our customers be more productive at what they do so that they can drive more revenue? And I think one of the things I'd like to leave our audience with today is that continuous improvement helps us get better at what we need to do from a visioning standpoint. We also need to be in the know of what our business is doing and our competitive and our industry so that we can look at opportunities for investing in our service delivery and help the customer and the business really break through with new ways to deliver their services. And if we can quantify that, we will then move up the value chain that Jim has talked about today. Jim, any last comments before we break for today?
Pete, I think we did maybe one last thought, and that is when we're looking at that business vision and we're doing an assessment and discovering that these are some challenge areas for ourselves, and we establish that in fact we do need to be fixing this based on the gap on stage 3, sometimes it's not something that we have the skills to fix. And so part of our jobs, and maybe I'll just leave this as a parting thought, part of our jobs in IT and in leadership sometimes is maybe we need to find a partner to help us with an area that's not our core area of expertise. So don't always assume that the things that need to be done are things that we can do, but we can certainly be guiding.
Yeah, and there are people out there, there are associations out there are educators like Thought Rock out there are really people willing to share their expertise with everyone. So you're not alone, you don't have to do it alone. There's a lot of help out there that can help guide you through the path and hopefully not make the mistakes that other people have made and figure out what's important and what's not important. I think that's certainly a lesson that Jim shared with us today. Jim, anything else then?
Nope. I think the last part of this six-step process is just keeping the momentum, and again, it goes to back to the vision. What is the business now that we've done that? What do we need to do next? So, yeah, grab a good book, Leading Change. Definitely spend some more time thinking about how do we move from business vision to establish what are the critical success factors for the work that we're doing, tying this back to dollars so that we can get the resources think it's going to make, for all of us in IT, it's going to make us a much better, it's going to make us a much better organization.
Yep, and I'll add 2 books to that, Good to Great, and then also Execution by Larry Bassidi and Ram Charan. I still visit that book to help me figure out how to get things done. So, Jim, thank you very much for sharing that with us. We appreciate you joining us on Pete Talks.
It was my pleasure, Pete. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yep, and the one last thing I'd like to share with you, I had a mentor that talked about the maturity model of IT. And the first kind of reactive side that we were on was kind of an order taker. The business expects us to be there for them and fulfill orders and solve problems within an SLA. The next step, once we do that well, is they give us an opportunity to partner with them on various initiatives. And then the third piece of where we'd love to be is that trusted advisor role, where the business feels comfortable with our expertise, our understanding of the business, and our willingness to partner, where they could call us at any time and ask advice. And that would be great if we could all get there together. So we'd love to hear from you. Let us know how we're doing here on Pete Talks. The next Pete Talks will be on Tuesday, April 9th, 2013 at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be talking about business and technology trends that change the way we work and also change the roles and responsibilities of the jobs that we have within IT. I'm going to look to bring a panel together, multiple people, so we're going to have special surprise guests there on that show. Please join us for that. Thank you. Have a great day. Appreciate you joining us. Let us know how we're doing. Thank you.